Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our seminar today. We are joined by a lovely team. We are joined by Jolene, Hercules, Charlize, myself, and Harvey. We are the financial advisors at Nesha Investments. If you haven't known that yet, we are also joined with Eugene and Pierre from Apex, and they are going to tell us a little bit more of today's session. I'm going to hand you over to Eugene, and he will take it from there.
Hi, Megan. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and thank you for inviting us to speak with your clients about something that's very topical, and we get a lot of questions on that, and I'm sure you too, about all the geopolitics going on at the moment, the war in the Middle East, and the impact it's got on things like oil and inflation, but more specifically, markets and clients' investments and what to make of it. I'm also joined by our Managing Director, Pierre de Klerk from Apex Investment Consulting SA. Pierre's been involved with running portfolios for almost 3 decades, not to give away your age, Pierre, but rather speaks to your experience in the industry. Thank you so very much for making yourself available to speak to our clients. You've also had a lot of questions and discussions with various fund managers and research companies across the globe, trying to make sense of what's going on in the Middle East and Trump and the rhetoric. So looking forward to an update on how you see the world and how we should think about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene, for the introduction, and thank you, Hercules and team, for the opportunity. I'll be speaking about the very topical area currently that's in the news, and that is the war or the conflict in the Middle East and how that is likely to influence the world economy, the oil price, inflation, and so forth, and how that might affect our portfolios in the medium and in the short term. So if we just start by looking at the Middle East and asking, why did this happen? Why did Israel and the US attack Iran? And there's a lot of speculation about what the true reasons are, but the one reason that was put forward by the US, and certainly that Israel feels strongly about, was Iran's nuclear program and the risk that Iran might be able to build a nuclear weapon, and that they would then use that against potentially Israel and maybe other countries. So that was the main reason why there was the intervention by the US and Israel. And if we look at the map, the distance looks big on the map, but the distance between Iran and Israel is anything between 1,000 kilometers and 1,500 kilometers. So Bloemfontein to Cape Town or Joburg to Cape Town is basically the distance we're talking about. And a ballistic missile can travel that distance in 10 to 12 minutes. So obviously the Israelis were very concerned about their security if Iran were to develop a nuclear weapon. Now, other reasons that's been put forward is regime change. It's all interlinked, obviously, but regime change to try and change the government in Iran to make it a less aggressive and a more kind of friendly regime to its neighbors. So what happened at the end of February was that the US and Israel launched attacks against Iran to topple the regime and to make sure that they can't develop further on the nuclear side. And Iran then responded. So the first thing maybe to say is that the initial attack by Israel and the US was very successful. They killed the supreme leader. They killed about 40 other senior leaders in Iran. And they've basically sustained those attacks over the last two and a half weeks. But I think it's also fair to say that it's probably drawing out longer than what the US thought it might take. They had a very quick intervention in Venezuela that literally took less than 24 hours before that, and that might have given them kind of the confidence to attack Iran, also thinking it might be over soon. But Iran responded, and in a way they responded in a way that might have been predicted, but I think was still a surprise to most observers and to the US and Israel. And what they did was they attacked the US bases in the Middle East, and that's what's shown on this map, which is maybe not so surprising. But what they also did was that they attacked the oil infrastructure and the civilian infrastructure in the Gulf neighbor states that are also shown on the map. And I think the reason behind the Iranian attack on its neighbors, as surprising as it might be, is to put pressure on the US via the neighbors. So they effectively want the Gulf states to put pressure on the US to stop its aggression. And the way that they put pressure on the other Gulf states is by attacking their economy through the attack on oil infrastructure and also civilian infrastructure. Here you can see on a photo damage that was done by an Iranian missile to a block of flats in Dubai. So they certainly are attacking civilian infrastructure as well. This graph shows the number of projectiles that Iran shot at the UAE since the start of the conflict on the 28th of February. And as you can see, it started off with very high numbers of missiles being directed at the UAE, but that has tapered down up till this data goes up to yesterday. So it's uncertain whether they're running out of missiles and out of drones, or whether they are holding some of them back for strategic reasons. The Israelis, for their part, suspect that Iran probably still have 30 to 40% of its drone and missiles in stock. So it's a bit difficult to determine, whether they're really running down the stockpiles. This graph is similar. It shows the attacks that Iran made on the other Gulf neighbors, and it is continuing, as you can see towards the right of the graph, but it certainly has tapered off in volume. So the question is, are they running out? Does that mean it's going to be a short-lived war and soon things might turn for the better and for normal? Or is this some sort of a strategy whereby they're preparing to sustain it at a low level for much, much longer? One of the problems for the US and Israel is that the mathematics or the finance of the war against Iran doesn't make a lot of sense. And what that means is you use very expensive aircraft to fire very expensive missiles to intercept Iranian drones. That does not cost a lot. So it's about a 1 to 50 ratio. The US and Israel spend $50 for every $1 that the Iranians are spending, because the missiles are so expensive and the drones that Iran uses to attack the neighbors and attack Israel and the US bases are relatively cheaper. So it is problematic, the extent to which this is financially sustainable. And as you can see, in the first 4 days, the US spent almost $4 billion. And up to, I think, the 12th day, they had spent about $11 billion. So they're roughly spending $1 billion a day on the conflict currently, which obviously does have a financial cost to the US fiscus and to the US taxpayer eventually. One of the big problems is the impact that this has on the oil price. It's probably, from an investment point of view and from the point of view of our portfolios, the biggest potential problem, because the oil price, if it goes very high, will affect inflation negatively, and it might even lead the world into a recession. So let's delve a bit deeper into that. Currently, the Strait of Hormuz is basically closed for shipping. This graph shows that on average about 50 ships move through the Strait of Hormuz, and currently, because of the attacks by Iran on ships and the threat of the attacks, or the threat of attacks on ships, basically no ships are getting through. A few ships that Iran is letting through, ships owned by China and so forth, have gone through. But for any Western ship, effectively the strait is closed. And the concern is that Iran might put naval mines in the strait as a long-term strategy to blockade the strait so that oil tankers cannot get through, and that'll seriously impact the oil price. Just to show you the picture of where the Strait of Hormuz is, it's that very narrow section in the Gulf. It's about 20 miles wide and much narrower in the middle, where the big ships need to to traverse through. So that is causing a choke point, and there's no other way of getting oil out of the Gulf. And the other reason why Iran are able to disrupt the flow of ships is that there are all these small islands where they have military personnel like the Revolutionary Guard stationed. And from there, they can attack ships with fairly unsophisticated kind of weapons, small boats with explosives that kind of go up next to the tankers and plant the explosive and so forth. So it's what they call asymmetric warfare. The US and Israel certainly have the upper hand in terms of sophisticated weaponry, but the Iranians, because of the asymmetry in the cost and the logistics in terms of the position that they have, are able to, with relatively unsophisticated means, cause a lot of disruption. The Strait of Hormuz accounts for about 20 million barrels of oil moving through it on a normal day. Currently, that has gone to zero, and that's about 20 to 25% of the global shipping of oil. So it's material in the global context of where oil is shipped around the world. So the question is, how dangerous is this? You know, the oil price was at the 60-70% level for much of the last year before the conflict. It's now gone up to $100. When there was one day where it went up to $120, but it came back, and it's currently around $100 to $104 per vat. Now, like I said, we're interested in how big the risk is and what the implications for inflation might be. So on the left-hand side, there's a graph that shows, if we look at previous geopolitical incidences that affect the oil price, how does the oil price behave in the number of days after the initial incident? So for the current period, 0 will be the date of the attack by Israel and the US on Iran, and then obviously the response thereafter. And as you can see, the green line is the average across all these geopolitical events, which shows that on average, if we look at historic events, the oil price is about 23 to 25% higher than its pre-geopolitical event level 60 days after the event, or 2 months after the event. So if that were to hold, that would mean that the oil price would go from $70 to $95, and it's relatively close to where we are currently at, and we're currently close to day 20 on this trajectory. We're basically at the 20% or 25% higher level compared to previously. The question is it going to go higher, or is it going to stabilize at this level? As you can see on the right-hand side, it's already having an effect on jet fuel, petrol in the US. Even in South Africa, there's talk of quite meaningful petrol and diesel increases in the next month, and that clearly will have an effect on inflation. And just to quote some numbers, a lot of researchers are doing a lot of projections currently, but two of the projections that I've seen, I can highlight. The one said that if the oil price stays at the current level of about $100 to $110, the impact on US inflation will be that inflation will move in the US up from 2.4% to 3.5%. Now, that's quite a meaningful move. And in South Africa, the projection was that if oil were to go to $125, so basically $25 higher than the current level, and stay there for a period of time, then our inflation will probably go up to the 7% level from the current 3.5% or close to 4% level. So our inflation will really meaningfully move up under the conditions of an oil price of $125 per vat. And that will mean interest rate cuts will not happen. Before the conflict at the start of this year, both in the US and in South Africa, we expected 1 or 2 interest rate cuts this year, which would help the economy. Now, if inflation is much higher and we don't get that rate cuts, it obviously will be less good for the economy, and it will likely be less good for equity markets as well. So these are the things we need, or the levels that we need to kind of keep an eye on. One piece of good news is that the world is less dependent on oil to generate economic growth than what it was in the past. And this graph goes back almost 60 years, and it shows you that in the 70s, the world was much more dependent on oil to generate growth compared to now. And one of the reasons for that is that services in the world have become much bigger as a driver of economic growth. Tech is a good example of that. Some of the biggest companies in the world are essentially service companies: Amazon, Facebook, Google, Meta, all those technology companies that provide technology services to us are not production companies. They are service companies, and they are not necessarily oil intensive. As an aside, artificial intelligence, the AI theme, is very electricity intensive. So it is energy intensive and therefore indirectly oil intensive, but it is not as intensive as production businesses. So it is a bit of a good news that the world, by virtue of how economic structures have changed over the last number of decades, have become less dependent on oil. But oil is still very important, and it will have an effect on inflation, as we've already said. Now, how bad must the oil price get? How high must the oil price go to really threaten the world economy into a recession? And that is what this graph shows. And it basically shows at the bottom the behavior of the oil price. And at the top, it shows you the S&P 500 and the red, which is the equity index in the US. And the red parts of the top graph show you the bear markets and the recessions in the US and pretty much in the world, because the US is 2/3 of the world market. Now, the point about the graph is, if you look at the bottom graph, there's a dotted line at the 100 level. And what that means is, on a year-on-year basis, the oil price need to double in order to cause an economic recession. Historically speaking, the world was prone to going into recession in periods where the oil price at least doubled on an annual basis. Now, as I mentioned earlier, conflict, the oil price for much of the previous year was between $60 and $70. If you use this as an analogy, it means that the oil price effectively need to go to about $140 to $150 and stay there for quite a number of months in order to tip the world into recession. So we're not quite there. It is a risk if the conflict is drawn out, but the levels at which we are now will cause pain. It will cause higher inflation and potentially higher interest rates, but it won't necessarily at these levels lead to an economic recession in the US and the world. The US is also a net exporter of oil in recent years, and that's another positive change. So there are shale energy in the US that can come upstream, that can offset some of the pressure on the oil price. But oil is not the only commodity that is of interest, and this graph just shows some of the other commodities that also get shipped through the Strait of Hormuz: sulfur, urea, those kind of things, liquid gas, ammonia, and most of these things are inputs into fertilizers, as I'm sure you might deduce. So one second order effect might be increased prices for fertilizer and therefore increased food prices, which then will lead to food price inflation and upward pressure on general inflation. So that's also an issue. So if we think through the second order effects, if there's not a quick resolution to the conflict, we might see more expensive food, we might see more expensive coal, if that is an alternative that countries need to use as an alternative to oil. Oil we've already spoken about. Goods inflation, because goods are being shipped with more difficulty through, around the world. If the Strait of Hormuz is not navigatable, that might lead to goods inflation. All these other inputs might lead to goods inflation. And then the pressure on the countries in the Middle East might mean that some of their reserves that they keep in the rest of the world might be withdrawn and moved back, repatriated to the Gulf countries to bolster their own finances and maybe help their economies. Obviously, with the Iranian attacks currently, the oil economy is being hurt, the tourism is being hurt, so they are definitely suffering economic damage, and they might withdraw money that they've invested in the rest of the world through their sovereign wealth funds, for example, and move it back to the Middle East, and that might put some downward pressure on the investments in the rest of the world where they move money out of. So how has the markets reacted so far? And I think the market reaction have been relatively benign. It has not been that big, which is positive. So oil prices have gone up, but if you look at bond yields have moved up a bit, but they haven't moved up higher than what they were in April last year when the US tariffs were announced. When Donald Trump announced the US tariffs in April last year, there was also concerns about future inflation, and bond yields went up, then they came down again, and now they're moving up, but they're not even yet at those levels. So bonds are by and large under control. The equity market has come off a bit, but it's had a very strong run since April last year, or since the middle of last year. So you can see it's still at quite an elevated level. It's not even at the lowest point in the last 6 months or so. The dollar has strengthened because the dollar is traditionally a safe haven asset. So money usually flow towards the dollar and towards US assets when there are geopolitical problems in the world. And you can see the dollar has strengthened a bit, and the rand has weakened, as we have all experienced. And that's just the flip side of the coin. But in our assessment, markets have not fallen out of bed. And here's a bit more detail. The MSCI World Index, world equities around the whole world, have come off in the recent past since the conflict started, but it's not at a particularly low level compared to kind of the last 2 or 3 years. There's the 2022 lows, and there's the COVID lows. So you can see, although we've had anything between 6 and 8% of equity downside globally so far, it hasn't really collapsed to very low levels. Same with the US market, the S&P 500, and the same with the South African All Share. We've had lower equity markets, but it's not out of the trend of the volatility that we've had in the last number of years. So it almost looks like normal volatility at the moment. It does not look like a crisis that, like COVID, for example, caused. Now, that's not to say we're safe. Obviously, these things take time to work through the system. Higher oil price takes time to affect the economy, takes time to affect companies. It'll take time to affect inflation. So these things will play out over the next year or so, and there might still be volatility and downward pressure in the market. But the sooner the conflict is resolved, hopefully through political means, the smaller the chance is that there will be a serious dislocation. And there's lots of kind of speculation and news flow and propaganda kind of swirling around the world. But there has been talk that the US and Iran has been in direct contact over the last number of days. So there is some chance that there might possibly come a political solution to the current problem. Just on the topic of geopolitical shocks and how they affect markets, this graph looks at geopolitical shocks in the past of different natures: the Gulf War, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in the 90s, the Ukraine invasion by Russia, and so forth. And if you focus on the light pink or the light purple line, you can see that there normally is stress around the point where a geopolitical event happens, but then 6 months later, on average, the market is higher. Now, the nature of the geopolitical event does matter. Geopolitical events that influence the oil price seems to have a longer lasting effect than compared to geopolitical events that do not affect the oil price. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's why we are not overly relaxed, and we will stay vigilant as to where this stabilizes and whether it really reaches the levels that are high danger in our view. This is another graph that looked at 57 previous major geopolitical events from the day when it happened and then 6 months afterwards. And in a broader set of events, if you look at the average, the market was actually up by about 6% 6 months after the event happened. So I think clearly there is always a spread of what the outcomes can be, but the average seems to be on the positive side. And I think that's a typical reflection of the fact that when geopolitical events happen, there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of bad news get priced into the market in the short term. And ultimately, the reality turned out that what happens in reality is not as bad as what people fear immediately when there is an event. And I mean, similarly, the equity market came back after COVID. And, you know, that's just the nature of humans, I suppose, and of the market, that setbacks are kind of dealt with and ultimately the market move upwards. This is a bit of a flow chart of what might happen with the conflict, and we are kind of in this bottom right-hand corner now, where Iran have responded against the Gulf neighbors and against Israel. So it has kind of deteriorated into a situation where the oil price is up, and for the time being, it is a risk-off environment. But these things can resolve themselves quickly. You know, if there can be a political solution or there can be a truce between the US, Israel, and Iran, then many of these negatives can very quickly turn around, and the market can give a serious relief rally. So that also explains why we are not too defensive and want to be too much underweight or in cash or out of the market, because, you know, if there is a resolution that does not have a 0% probability, if there were to be a solution to the conflict sometime soon, the market will definitely give a quite serious relief rally, and one also does not want to miss out on that. So we want to calibrate our positions quite successfully. Where does China stand in all of this? China is quite dependent on Iranian and Venezuelan oil, so the US is indirectly putting pressure on China through its intervention in Iran and in Venezuela, and maybe that's part of a bigger strategic competition between the US and China. But just like the world have become less dependent on oil for economic growth, so too China has also over time become less dependent. So that is a mitigating factor. If we turn to the US, the war is unpopular across the political spectrum, and that is another reason why Donald Trump might be looking for what they call an off-ramp, or a way to get to a truce with Iran and to stop the hostilities. A big reason for that is across the political spectrum, Americans aren't keen on this war. It's far from the US. The average American did not perceive Iran to be an existential threat to the US. They certainly don't want American army personnel on the ground in Iran, so they are maybe still okay with an air war, but they have the memory of Iraq and Afghanistan, where the US military got bogged down for years and years and years, and really battled to extract themselves from it. So there's definitely going to be political pressure on President Trump to end the war. There are midterm elections in November in the US, and the closer we get to November, if the war is not resolved and voters in the US take a negative view on that, the more dangerous it becomes for President Trump and for the Republican Party, that they might not do well. That's the macro oversight or kind of high-level picture about what's going on in the Middle East and the potential risks and implications from that. How does our process respond to that, and what do we implement in the Netsher NMS portfolios? How do we approach it? We look at investments from both a top-down and a bottom-up perspective. Bottom-up means we look at the valuations of assets. So are equities cheap? Are bonds cheap or expensive? Where should we invest in? Top-down refers to all the economic metrics that I've been talking about now. So in the top-down aspect, we look at growth in the world and in South Africa. We look at inflation, we look at interest rates, we look at fiscal spending, and we look at geopolitical risk. And that gives us an idea of how we want to be positioned. And what I want to point out is that even before the conflict, because of the tariff news last year and the fact that Donald Trump has had a fairly aggressive political relationship with other countries and with the rest of the world, we had already scored geopolitical risk at the maximum negative score that we could and implemented that in portfolios. So this negative score that we gave geopolitical risk prevented us from being too overweight in risk assets like equities in portfolios, and therefore we are kind of neutral to slightly defensive currently and even before the crisis happened. So I want to give you the comfort that the Netsher NMS portfolios were not in a overly overweight exposure position to risk assets and to equities when the Middle Eastern conflict happened. We were already a bit cautious, and we are maintaining that caution. We're not very underweight or very out of the market for the reasons that I mentioned. If a resolution to the conflict suddenly comes, the equity market will definitely give a relief rally, and we don't want to miss out on that. And apart from that, there has been positive economic development since the start of this year, or really the end of last year. This graph shows purchasing manager index numbers for different countries in the world. And you don't have to worry about the detail, but the more green it is, the better the news is. And as you can see, at the end of 2025 and into 2026, there was a lot of green and not many or not much red or even no red. So that tells you, economically speaking, the world was doing better before the Middle East conflict. And we were therefore at least neutral on equities and risk assets. We weren't too negative, but we were a bit cautious because of that geopolitical risk score that I showed you just now. So the implication is the world was doing better before the conflict, and we now hope that the conflict resolves itself within a reasonably short period of time so that this does not get derailed, so that the good economic trajectory and direction for most of the countries in the world can continue that started at the end of last year and into this year. So all is not lost if the current conflict resolves itself, hopefully by political means relatively soon, and therefore the oil price behaves and at least don't go up much higher, then we might have a period of pain, but we won't necessarily sustain serious losses. And that's really what we are looking at. Earnings of companies across the world were also picking up towards the end of last year. So this fits the economic picture that I showed you just now. And again, it reinforces the fact that things were looking better. Things were looking at the up. And hopefully much of this will not get derailed if the Middle East conflict can be resolved and does not push oil to $140. Emerging markets have been doing well over the last year. Relative to developed markets, it's actually done better. South Africa also did very well last year. We participated in that. And emerging markets like South Africa is still cheaply valued compared to developed markets. So emerging markets and South Africa is cheaper on our equity side compared to the US and the rest of the world. So, less expensive means maybe less at risk, So that gives us a bit of a buffer. And again, should the current situation resolve, there is a good upside for emerging markets and for the South African market. What might happen in markets? We might see a rotation back from industrials and technology shares closing their gap. So last year, we saw technology doing less well than industrials. Industrial companies are more exposed to the oil price. So one thing that might happen is that the technology companies like the Googles, the Amazons, and so forth of the world might do better again in the short term because of the lower oil price dependency, and some of the industrial companies might do less well. So within the equity market, we will be looking at our active managers to position themselves correctly for the environment that might be best suited to make money for this year and next year. On the bond side, the graph on the right-hand side is interesting because it shows that the peak in the oil price is usually also the peak in the bond yields. And bond yields are inversely related to the price of a bond. So if a bond yield goes up, you lose money on bonds. If a bond yield goes down, you make money on bonds. So what this graph tells you is if you are at the peak of the oil price, you are typically also at the peak of the bond yield cycle. And from there onwards, it's actually a good time to invest in bonds, because then as the bond yield falls, you make money on bonds, you get capital gains on bonds. So that's another indirectly positive thing of a higher oil price. It will push inflation higher, but it'll give you an entry point into bonds, so to speak. Gold is another investment avenue that typically does well when there is geopolitical risk. And the South African market have a relatively high exposure to gold mining, which is positive, all else equal, for our market. And to the extent that portfolios hold direct exposure to gold, this is also a good hedge against inflation and against geopolitical risk. And again, if we look into the Nesher NMS portfolios, we do see some gold exposure held by the underlying managers there, and that is a positive development. If we briefly look at the rand weakened a bit from where it was previously. We're now kind of at the high 16 level. It is still weaker than what it should be in theory. In theory, the rand should be around the 15% level. Reaching 50 will now probably be delayed, even if SA and emerging markets does better. For the time being, as long as there is trouble in the Middle East, the rand will probably be under a bit of pressure, but there is the ability for the rand to strengthen again should the current problems resolve themselves. The rand is not stronger than what it should be. It's actually marginally weaker than what it should be. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip past these slides and just stop on this one to say in portfolios, we are roughly neutral in our exposure. We have some small overweights to South African equity, for example, but close to neutral. We keep some fixed income exposure in South Africa, and in the Nesher NMS portfolios, we've got a buffer of fixed income that we maintain in the portfolio. We've had that in the portfolio for the last year, and that will protect us a bit against equity weakness if equity weakness further ensues. So we are maintaining the current relatively neutral position, but we do have some buffers in the portfolio, mainly South African fixed income through our bonds, because our bond yields are still around the 10% level. It gives you a good return, a good yield. So it makes sense to have a portion of the portfolio exposed to bonds and use that as a bit of a risk buffer against equities. I think I'll stop there. So in summary, the war in the Middle East is certainly not good news, as wars generally are not. It will put pressure on the world economy. It will put pressure on the oil price as it is doing currently. It will cause potentially higher inflation, and therefore interest rates that does not come down as fast as we would like them to go. In the worst case scenario, interest rates might go up a bit, but as I hope I've illustrated and spoke about, the current levels that we're seeing are not at the disaster levels yet. An oil price of 150 for a sustained period of time will be closer to a recessionary level, and that'll be bad news for portfolios, and then we will take action to portfolios. So you can rest assured, if the oil price moves up, and as the oil price move up from the current level of 100%, we will position portfolios more defensively if we get to those levels, and to protect portfolios further. But as I said, we also don't want to miss out on any bounce back of the market if there's a quick resolution. So we need to really keep our eye on the geopolitical news. Unfortunately, it's all over the show at the moment, but it's not inconceivable that there might come a resolution. One reason might be that there is a lot of political pressure on President Donald Trump in the US, because he's got elections at the end of the year, and he does not want to alienate voters with a long drawn out war and high gasoline prices in the US that affect their purchasing power. So I think he has incentives to look for an end to the war and for an off-ramp, and hopefully they find that before serious damage is done. I think I'll stop there. Thank you, Hercules.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you. I think for our clients, important that I love the fact that you showed where we've got our strategy in place, the planning is done. We carefully looking at everything. We cautiously to defensively structured. We will review that if necessary. And I think that's very important. And I want to say, Pierre, I can say that to the clients, well, Apex yourselves are doing a great job for us. And we're very thankful for having you in our team or on our side. And I really appreciate that. I want to also, if there's any of we're going to send this out as a link. If any of our clients do have questions, you're welcome to mail it to either myself or the brokers who service you, the financial advisors, it's a nice name. And we can then forward that to Eugene or to Pierre for specific answers maybe to your questions. So you're welcome to do that, and we'll keep you posted. Thank you very, very much, everyone. And I hope that you can still see that we're here and we're working day on day to make sure that we deliver our service to our clients. Thank you.